Perfectionistic. Now, perfectionistic's a somewhat complex style. It's characterised by a strong drive, a strong need to do everything perfectly, to be seen as perfect. So what happens when the thought process says, I have to do this task perfectly? Firstly, what kicks in is an extraordinary need to bury yourself in detail. So people who are highly perfectionistic use that style of thinking and behaviour tend to be very, very detail oriented. They tend to be quite finicky about how things look. So if you watch the individuals in the program, the individual behaviour, you'll see that the person is concerned with how things look. She's rearranging things to making sure that everything looks perfectly as they are supposed to. That's classic perfectionistic behaviour. The first thing a perfectionist will do sitting down at the dinner table is make sure that all of the knives and forks and spoons are lined up the way they're supposed to be. They'll have books on their bookshelf in descending height order. Perfect order. One of the big issues, so on the face of it, it doesn't actually sound that bad. I mean, it's very task-oriented. It's starting to move up and towards the satisfaction top half of the profile. But one of the fundamental problems with using perfectionistic style as a thought process or a behaviour pattern is that actually you cannot achieve perfection. So therefore, the perfectionist is never satisfied. They never get that sense of joy and satisfaction from doing a job well, because of course it's never done well enough, because you can never achieve perfection. So they're strongly driven, and within that driven aspect is a relatively strong stress pattern. The more you strive to do things perfectly, and the more frustrated you become because in fact you can't do things perfectly, then the more stressful you're going to find the circumstances that you're in. So we tend to find, when we look at the research around the styles, there's a very strong relationship between certain symptoms of strain and this perfectionistic style. There is a very strong difference between the desire to perfect something and the desire to do something perfectly. So achievement is more about a desire to perfect, to do things better and well. Perfectionistic about a need to do things perfectly. For the perfectionistic person, they very, very much attach their sense of self-worth to the task that they do. I write a good report, I am a good person. What that means, of course, is that if you begin to criticise my report, you're not just criticising my report, you're criticising me. So of course I'm going to get defensive about that, thus the aggressive defensive style. Essentially, this need to be perfect, to do things perfectly, is driven by a fear of failure. So it's not uncommon in looking at individual and even group profiles to see perfectionistic actually going with avoidance. Because perfectionistic is driven by fear of failure. So because my whole thought process is about I should not fail, then one of the ways I'll cope with that fear of failure is to try and do everything perfectly. And so of course, because I never do it perfectly, I actually get the sense that I failed. So it's a never-ending cycle that is self-defeating. When we look at perfectionistic at the group level, that behaviour pattern is very much about getting caught up in details, that they get bogged down in their details in efforts to get a perfect solution. I mean, if you're part of a management group, you will know the reality of life is you never have all the information. So you've got to do the best you can with what you've got. The perfectionistic group will never go there. They will always want more information. They will never have enough information. And in so doing, they'll get bogged down in that sort of analysis paralysis, or it's characteristic of the organisational level of organisations that have thousands of project groups, because a project group is an illusion that we're actually doing something, whereas in fact we're only working towards the solution, we're not solving anything at all. So the sense of perfectionistic in an organisation is that everybody must appear very competent. We must look as if we know. Here's an illustration. I'm talking to a GMHR, a relatively large organisation, and I'm saying to her, look, here's some ideas around how we might look at restructuring the business. And she tells me they have an executive meeting that afternoon. And I said, look, why don't you take these ideas into the meeting and just float them and see what the other execs think. Her immediate reaction was, I couldn't do that because I'm not prepared. I said, what do you mean? She said, I can't go to the Execom group without a paper. I cannot go without detailed preparation so that they can't find fault with what I'm doing. And I said, hey, that's not the objective. The objective was to float an idea and see what people think. Her response was, we don't do things that way here. There you have a perfectionistic organisation. Did we just lose an opportunity? Of course we did. Okay? So at the individual level, when you look at the perfectionistic behaviour in the program, you'll see the strong sense of detail, the somewhat rather tight person who's always concerned with appearances and what things look like, who won't do anything without the preparation for it. And when you see it at the group level, it's very much about getting bogged down in a whole lot of detail that actually doesn't necessarily have a great deal to do with what we're striving to achieve. It's self-limiting, it's very stressful, it does produce results, but at huge cost to the individual. So we have to be careful with that. If we can take that perfectionistic drive and move it towards more achievement orientation, where perhaps we set a slightly more realistic goal, then the fundamental difference will be that huge sense of pleasure. And in fact, it's a chemical reaction inside the body when we experience pleasure. That sense of satisfaction of knowing that I did it very well and I achieved what I set out to achieve, as opposed to this constant sense of frustration that resides in perfectionistic of I'm never doing it well enough because I'm striving for something that is in fact unattainable. That's perfectionistic.